أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة على سيد الخلائق أجمعين محمد وأشرف الأنبياء. I start in the name of Allah, the all merciful towards all creatures, the kindest towards believers. Welcome to tonight's program. The verses that we just recited sends blessings towards Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his holy progeny, the best creations who have been on this earth. And tonight we're discussing one of the very, very key members of this progeny, having just finished from the 10 days of Ashura and topics that we have covered. We return again and thank you for being with us again as we talk about some other aspects of these important events in the history, in Shia history, and also very, very importantly, history of Islam and how it's turned the world and continues to be a very important part of it for millennia. I would like to welcome Brother Sayyid Musavi to begin the program with recitation of Quran. Please recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن للمتقين مفازا حدائق وأعنابا وكواعب أترابا وكأسا دهاقا لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا كذابا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن للمتقين مفازا حدائق وأعنابا وكواعب أترابا وكأسا دهاقا لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا كذابا. جزاء من ربك عطاء حسابا. رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما الرحمن لا يملكون منه خطابا. يوم يقوم الروح والملائكة صفا لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا. يوم يقوم الروح والملائكة صفا لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا. ذلك اليوم الحق ذلك اليوم الحق فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه مآبا ذلك اليوم الحق فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه مآبا إنا أنذرناكم عذابا قريبا يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا إنا أنذرناكم عذابا قريبا يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد
صل على محمد وعلى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Thank you very much, Brother Taha, for that beautiful recitation once again, and blessing us with the verses, the Holy Quran, beautiful recitations that you do. May Allah bless you and reward you, and also keep you in good health and all your family, particularly at this time. Now, tonight we are looking at one of the important topics in Ashura and the manifestations and the after what unfolded after these events, and the important role that Sayyida Zaynab played. And particularly, we are wanting to look at the role of trauma and growth. As always, our lectures are always interactive, so please send us your questions, get involved in the discussion, as it's always live, and we can go on directions that you want and answer your questions on the spot. Log into Vvox, put the code up that will be presented, and also don't forget to give us feedback. And we'd love to know what else you want us to focus on, which directions to go on. So without further ado, our topic tonight, Sayyida Zaynab and post-traumatic growth. I would like to welcome Sheikh Hamid Waqar. We had the pleasure of listening to the discussions that he has had over these past nights, along with our other speakers, and tonight we'll continue to benefit from his wisdom and his talk. So welcome him with loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. You just have me tonight, so we don't have Sheikh Ali Saftari or Sheikh Mohammed Dahani with me tonight. They were both busy, couldn't make it. I wanted to kind of lead on from the discussion that we had in our last talk in Muharram. So the last talk that we had, we looked at Sayyida Zaynab, salamullah alayha, and we looked basically at Beck's cognitive triad, and we used Beck's cognitive triad to explore how Sayyida Zaynab responded to the trauma that she experienced in Karbala. And I want to do something similar, but I want to look at a different psychological concept, which is called post-traumatic growth. So I'm sure many people have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. That's what happens when one obtains a host of negative symptoms following a traumatic event. And that traumatic event could be something that they experienced personally, they witnessed, or even that they heard about. And post-traumatic growth is when one has certain positive characteristics or positive growth that happens after experiencing trauma. So I wanted to look at that. Now, many people in the world experience some form of trauma, experience intense stress, experience crisis in their life. One prime example is the current pandemic that we're living in, right? So this COVID-19 pandemic, many people have died, and all of the, people's family members who have died, people know people who have passed away, and this is very difficult for them. Some people have become very sick, been hospitalized, put on ventilators, and that was a traumatic experience for them. In addition to that, there's extreme levels of unemployment. There's the global economic downturn that has come as a result of all of the restrictions and all of the responses to this virus, right? So most people understand hardship, unfortunately, in today's world. Now, during these times of hardship, during a traumatic experience, during a stressful experience, during crisis, many people will ask, what good could come of this? Some people start blaming God. Some people just, spiral into negativity because of the hardship that they're facing, right? Usually in the moment, that's what happens. Usually in the moment, someone can't realize a possible silver lining or something good that might come of this hardship that I'm currently facing. But in the future, many people will realize that there were some benefits to the hardship that I faced. There were some benefits to the trauma, the traumatic experience that I had to endure. There's some benefits from them. There's some silver linings, right? Sayyida Zaynab salamullah alayha's famous quote, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamilan," if authentic. We're not gonna examine it academically right now, but this very famous quote where she's asked, how she saw the massacre of her brother and family and close companions, and she says, I didn't see anything but beauty, right? This is the peak of such a thought process where you would, in the future, after a traumatic event, you would look back and you would see some form of silver lining. She's saying, I didn't see anything but beauty. So it's even further than just a silver lining in a negative event, right? Now, many researchers look at post-traumatic growth from the standpoint of what happens after the trauma, right? So what response does this person have after the trauma that leads to growth? That means, how people contemplate the situation they were in affects whether or not they grow. For instance, one can look back at the traumatic experience and they could see that they have personal strength, that, wow, I was able to endure such a difficult time. I was able to move through it. And they realize that they're stronger than they thought they were. Sometimes after a traumatic event, one might explore new possibilities in life, right? Maybe one aspect of their life, one dimension of their life gets shut, the door becomes shut because of this trauma, but something else might open up. They might have a new perspective. Maybe after a traumatic event, one's relationships improve. Maybe they were distant from a certain family member, but that family member came and supported them and their relationship grew. So like, all right, I had to endure this traumatic situation and this traumatic event, but at the end of it, I gained a friend or I improved a relationship with a family member. Maybe one would have a greater appreciation of life, a near-death experience. Wow, I almost died. That was so close. I got into this, crazy car accident and my life flashed before my eyes and I didn't die, but wow, man, now I'm alive and I need to do something with my life, right? A new perspective. One might have spiritual growth after a traumatic event, right? They might say, man, Allah saved me. I was about to die. Allah saved me. And because of that, they connect more to God. They realize that life is short, that there's no promise for tomorrow. And they realize that, I need to make a change in my life. So a lot of research looks at post-traumatic growth in this way. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to look at it in this way. Rather, and the reason being is because none of those would necessarily hold true for Sayyida Zaynab sallallahu alayha, right? She was already at an extremely high level of existence. Maybe it's possible her response helped her grow closer to Allah, but that's not the focus that we have on this discussion. Rather, what I want to do is I want to discuss the predictors of post-traumatic growth, right? There's been plenty of research, and I'm just going to point to a few research articles that I came across, but there's much more out there. So feel free to research yourself as well. So there's a journal article that I found that was written in 2019. It's titled Predictors of Post-Traumatic Growth Among Conflict-Related Sexual Violence Survivors from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay, so unfortunately, in the civil war that took place in those countries, there was a lot of rape. A lot of people, the soldiers did a lot of terrible things, and that's not different from what Yazid did after the events of Karbala, when Yazid attacked Medina and ordered his soldiers to rape the women of Medina. So there's similarities there. Now, this study examined the relationship between post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress disorder. And they found that high levels of post-traumatic growth were associated with greater optimism, greater coping strategies, for instance, reinterpretation of the events, right? Ma ra'aytu illa jamilan being a prime example, and lower substance abuse. So a person who before the traumatic event has high levels of optimism, exhibits coping strategies, although those would be found afterwards, and does not have substance abuse issues, the likelihood of them growing from the traumatic event is more than someone who doesn't have those, right? So these three items predict post-traumatic growth. Another article, and we're going to go through 3 articles here. So a second article that was written last year in 2020 is titled this, Predictors of Post-Traumatic Growth, Insights from a Comparison between assault victims and non-assault victims. So in this article, they look at the differences of the traumatic events. So some traumatic events are violent and some aren't. So they looked at the differences. Now, this study did show that in assault victims, post-traumatic growth was predicted significantly by the individual's resilience. So the characteristic or the quality of resilience is another predictor of post-traumatic growth, meaning that if someone has high levels of resilience and then they find themselves in a traumatic event and they experience trauma, the likelihood of them growing from that trauma is greater than someone who doesn't have high levels of resilience, right? And the third article, which was written in 2019, states, predictors of post-traumatic growth among university students who experienced a recent earthquake. So that's the title of the article. And it's looking at an earthquake that happened in 2016 in South Korea and how it affected people, right? It found that the following 3 items predicted post-traumatic growth. 1, resilience. 2, religion. And 3, gender, right? So women had higher levels of protection against traumatic events. All right. So these predictors are not unique to these few studies that I mentioned. Many, many research articles mention these same predictors, and some even mention a few others. There's still a lot more research being done because this is relatively a new topic. So in the years to come, we'll learn a lot more about this. But what we have for now are these predictors. So the predictors were this: optimism, resilience, low substance abuse, better interpretation of events, and religion. Now, religion and spirituality are key. I would argue that out of all of the predictors, that if we look at religion, I would argue that that is the key aspect. Why? Because I feel all the other predictors could fall under the purview of religion, right? Think about it. Optimism, or a better interpretation of events, right? That might fall under religion. Resilience might fall under religion. Low substance abuse pretty clearly falls under religion, right? Now, with regards to optimism, religion teaches us to be optimistic, right? If we have a correct Islamic worldview, we would realize that one of the divine sunnahs, right, one of the rules that Allah has created the universe by, is that the believers eventually will be victorious. There's a verse of Quran, وَمَا يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. Right? Whoever takes for his guardian Allah, the messenger, and the believers, verily, Hezbollah, the party of God, will be victorious. Now, we know through the Islamic ideological perspective that all wrongs that take place in this world will be made right on the day of judgment. We know through the Islamic ideological perspective that everyone will get their due. And optimism is in that sense. I'm not talking about individualistic optimism that I, Mr. Hamid Waqar, will be successful in this world. No. What I mean by optimism is that the religion of God, that the mu'mineen, the believers, will be successful, right? And if their success doesn't occur during their lifetimes, in the hereafter it will. Right? Now, obviously, we're trying to attach ourselves to that group of believers, but the ideological perspective is that this is what's going to happen. So if one has that perspective, they're optimistic on a social, community level. Okay? And then when we take it into account, the Islamic perspective of fear and hope, and that balance that we're supposed to have between fear and hope, right? Where one is not supposed to be optimistic, overly optimistic, in the sense that they say they'll be going to heaven, regardless of what they do in this world, right? That balance kind of balances how much optimism we're supposed to have. So we're not supposed to have, we're not supposed to be over flooded by optimism, right? But we should have an optimistic perspective on, the success of Allah's desire, basically, right? Of the movement of Allah's religion, right? This will be successful, right? So optimism in that sense is definitely part of religion. Now, resilience, this is a very clear one, right? There's no doubt about resilience being an integral part of religion, right? Sayyida Zaynab, right? Resilience oozes out of Sayyida Zaynab. There's a sentence that's been recorded, لَقَدْ أَجَّبَتْ مِنْ سَبْرِهَا مَلَائِكَةِ السَّمَاءِ, right? The angels of the heavens were astonished by her patience, her perseverance, her resilience, right? When the women and the children were attacked after the events of Karbala, she became the nurse, she took care of them. When it was time to speak out, she stood up and confronted the rulers of her time, right? Despite the trauma that she saw, despite the difficulties that she faced, she always identified what her responsibility was in that moment and then performed it, and then did her responsibility, acted upon her duties, right? Now, that is sabr, that is istiqama, that's that perseverance and that resilience that religion teaches. Imam Ali alayhi salam, he says resilience on the right path leads to eternal reward and protects one from punishment, right? The next predictor is low substance abuse, and that's clear that a person who benefits from religiosity would try his best or her best to distance himself from substance abuse, right? Now, what are we saying so far? Okay, so let's take a step back. What I've been discussing up until now is that there's a concept called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is when one experiences trauma, and instead of that trauma breaking them, instead of that trauma creating negative psychological symptoms inside them, rather, this trauma leads to personal growth, right? So post-traumatic growth is the growth that one experiences after a traumatic event, okay? Now, we said that there are some predictors of post-traumatic growth, which means before one experiences trauma, we want to find out, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves for a traumatic event and being able to respond to a traumatic event in such a way that we will grow, that we will move towards Allah, that we will, despite the harshness and the difficulty of the event that we face, the traumatic event that we face, that will come out a stronger and better person, right? There were a number of predictors that was found in research, and as I said, it's still being researched, so we might learn more in the future. But until now, there was a few of them that we mentioned, right? We mentioned optimism. We mentioned a positive outlook on the events, like being able to find a silver lining in the negative event. We mentioned resilience. We mentioned low substance abuse, and we mentioned religion, right? Spirituality and religiosity. And I said that all of the other predictors can fall under the purview of religiosity. So that means being religious should help us, or should protect us from negative symptoms following a traumatic event. But, big but here. Now there's a question. Let me move on to this question before I throw in this big but. All right, so let's see what this question says. What is it that links resilience to religion apart from hope? So resilience, right? There's a whole discussion of what leads someone to be resilient, right? So where does resilience stem from? And I think the question is looking at that. But if you look at if you just take a step back and you look at any positive moral trait, right, or akhlaqi trait, and resilience would fall under that, I would feel that one of the ways to obtain this trait is having a correct kind of worldview, is being able to examine a matter outside of your own personal connection to it, right? And looking a step above or a step beyond from a religious perspective. So if we're looking at resilience in minute details of life, right? That means the ability to endure hardship in order to achieve a goal. Okay? Now, maybe waking up early for Fajr prayer is hard for you or for people. So being resilient and waking up is an instance of resilience. Why would I wake up? Because of my ideological perspective and my beliefs tell me that I should be waking up and praying to God at this time, right? Resilience could also be seen in other aspects of life, obviously, right? But if you're able to explain why you're being why you need to push through the hardship in order to achieve the goal, right? That, for me, that helps. But obviously, that's not the only thing, because if it was just, thinking, okay, this is something I should do, and then you do it, everyone would be resilient, everyone would be successful. But that's one aspect of it. And I think the deeper your relationship, or the deeper one's relationship with God is, and the more that they internalize this divine path, the stronger their resilience would become, right? So I feel that resilience, yes, can be seen in any matter. So it doesn't have to be seen in religion. You could be resilient in business. You could be resilient in sports. You could be resilient in crime, in criminal activity, right? So resilience is just enduring hardship to achieve a goal, right? But religion teaches us that we must be resilient in our obedience of God. So being resilient on the straight path is a religious command, basically, right? So the question is correct in stating that resilience is not only part of religion, but religion does teach that resilience is necessary in following the religion, right? If that makes sense. All right. So back to the question at hand. Religion was looked at as a protective factor for post-traumatic growth. Okay? Question though. How many people do we know who are religious but don't benefit in this way from religion? Historically, right? If we look, we're looking at Muharram here, at Karbala. The army of Yazid prayed. The army of Yazid performed their individual religious responsibilities. They fasted in the month of Ramadan. They paid zakat, right? There were people in that army who were classified as being religious. And then they did what they did. So their religiosity didn't save them from this heinous act that is, considerably worse than anything imaginable. So therefore, how can we say that religion by itself is a protective factor, right? How many people of us know people who are Muslim or who are quote unquote religious, but do not reach this level of benefit from the religion, right? So what I would propose is that being religious in and of itself isn't a protective factor, but being religious, and I'll use a catchphrase, being Zaynabiya, right? Being one who is able to see the divine hand in everything, who's able to recognize Allah's role in every aspect of life, who's able to look back on hardship and say, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila, right? Who's able to maintain their religion no matter what hardship and difficulty they're facing in life, who's able to recognize their responsibility in the society and perform that responsibility in order to help the community. That type of perspective on religion, that's what's going to help us grow through trauma. That's what's going to help us yield the benefits of religion. Otherwise, yeah, we might get some benefits, but I don't feel we're going to get, all of the benefits that religion can pose. And that's why a lot of the research that's done that shows that spirituality and religiosity are protective factors against a host of mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, I don't know, substance abuse is one of them. There's all kinds of research that's done that shows worldly benefits of spirituality or religiosity. I feel that the measures of or like the tools that are used to measure one's religiosity or one's spirituality, these need to really be researched, because I feel, an enormous amount of information and useful information when it comes to religion can be found if we could find good tools that could measure these constructs. All right, there's another question. Let me go to that question. How can we train ourselves to have the patience of Hazrat Zaynab sallallahu alaihi? Yeah, inshallah, you get there and you could teach me, right? I don't know how to do that. But look, inshallah, what we can do is we can take it step by step and realize that we're not anywhere there yet, but inshallah, in the future, we're trying to work towards improving our patience. And there's many methods that we could use. One of them would just simply be probably the most famous akhlaqi tool that our scholars have provided us with, which is the three aspects of watching over our actions, right? So at the beginning of the day, we do musharate, or we make a condition upon ourselves. We make a promise to ourselves and to God that we'll be patient today, or that we won't sin today, or whatever it is, right? So we're talking about patience here, that we make this promise at the beginning of the day. Today, in this 24-hour period, I'm going to be patient. I won't lose my temper. Whatever happens, I'm going to be patient. And then throughout the day, we do muraqabah, where we're watching over ourselves. And as we're watching over ourselves, what we're doing is we're remembering this promise that we made to ourselves or to Allah in the morning when we woke up, that today I'm going to be patient. And if I'm sitting in traffic and the car is driving slow in front of me and I want to just scream, I'm going to remember that, nope, today is the day that I'm patient. I'll yell at him tomorrow, but I'm not going to yell at him today. Today I'm going to be patient. And you get to work and someone's annoying you, or you go to school and someone's annoying you. No, today I'm just going to overlook it. Today I'm going to be patient. And you get home and one of your family members is bugging you. Nope, I'm not going to respond. Today I'm going to be patient. And then at the end of the day, you take account, you do muhasabah, and you examine yourself and you examine your actions, and you say, okay, I experienced these, these few stressful situations, or these few situations that I would normally react to, and I didn't react. So alhamdulillah, thank you Allah, I was able to be patient today, and inshallah give me the strength to be patient tomorrow. Or, yep, today at this one point, I was in traffic on the way home, I was really tired, and this car just cut in front of me, and I lost my cool for 10 seconds, right? I wasn't able to remain patient. Allah forgive me and give me the strength to be patient tomorrow, right? And you do that constantly, right? And what that's doing is it's training you to take account of your actions and to think of a way to better yourself, and kind of force yourself in a certain way to improve that aspect of your life. And if you do that with regards to patience, inshallah, that'll help you to improve patience. And if we do that for any aspect of our lives, trying to rid ourselves of any negative quality or trying to obtain any positive quality, this would be a effective method of doing so. So inshallah, we can try to adopt it. All right. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions up there. So thank you everyone for listening. Alhamdulillah, as always, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to be amongst you. And right before I close, a question comes up, which is great. Let's see what this question is. How is post-traumatic growth different to any other kind of growth a person may have in life? Some say life is just a trauma wheel that keeps turning. Yeah, look, post-traumatic growth is specific to growth that occurs after a traumatic experience, right? So it's, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, it might be strengthening of a relationship after a traumatic event. It might be increasing spirituality. It might be increasing an appreciation of life, or similar things like this. And that's what's defined or explained as post-traumatic growth in literature, right? So, but the key aspect is one has to experience trauma, and then these kind of thought processes or these events that happen afterwards, right? It stems from that traumatic event. Okay, so growth doesn't have to be from a traumatic event. I could decide that I want to improve my relationship with God without having to experience a traumatic event to make that decision, right? And if I do that and I decide to become a better person, or I might decide that I want to improve my relationship with my children, with my wife, with whoever, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to stem from a traumatic event, right? So growth doesn't have to come from trauma, but if it does stem from trauma, then that's what's called post-traumatic growth. And life is just a trauma wheel that keeps turning. Yes, unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's true. And you'd have to look at each instance of trauma, or even a collection of instances of trauma, and then look at whether or not the growth stems from that or stems from something else. And if it's too hard to decide, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Like, from a religious perspective, we want to grow, and the closer we get to God, the better. And it doesn't matter, how we got there, right? In the sense that it doesn't matter what sparked our decision to improve ourselves, whether it was a traumatic event or not. Inshallah, we all make that decision, and we make that decision without having to experience something negative in life, inshallah. But if we do experience something negative in life, inshallah, we can use that negative event to take a step forward and improve our lives, both in this world and the next, inshallah. And with that, I'm going to close. And thank you so much for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Hamid. Please, I would like to ask everyone to please recite aloud salawat for his well-being and his family's well-being. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, as always, I would like to draw your attention to some of the announcements that we normally make during our programs. Firstly, for anyone who's interested in participating in our programs, whether it be helping out with anything from designs, websites, posters, giving a hand in our preparation work, please feel free to contact us on our Facebook, via email or Instagram messages. And inshallah, we will see you face to face as soon as these current lockdowns are finished. And please, everyone, we hope that everyone stays safe, stays well, and all you here, family, anyone who you have anywhere across the world. Do remember that Sheikh Waqar has a website, Grace Wellbeing, and there are tons of stuff in there that are quite good reads, very beneficial. I personally, from tonight's discussion, I thank him for shedding light on the concept of post-traumatic growth. So many people focus on post-traumatic disorder, but I think maybe highlighting this other angle brings into light all the other growths that we could have, as well as acknowledging the stress that can come with it. Sheikh Saftari has his own website as well, with interesting discussions and topics, and also our brother Abbas runs the very useful YouTube channel, Islamic Lessons Made Easy, with lots of updates and stories and recaps of what Ashura is about as well. On that note, thank you for your participation and attendance. Please support us as always. We are charity group that run on your support, and inshallah we'll see you in our next programs. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.